In this episode, we kick off part one of a two-part series where we are counting down the biggest causes of hiring pain for those of you who are in a position where you have recruiting and hiring responsibilities. Can't wait to share this. Check it out. Over 2/3 of the global workforce considers themselves disengaged, unfulfilled, or worse when it comes to work. And I find that unacceptable. I'm Sean P. Martin, and welcome to Rebase, the show that's all about profession with purpose. Hey, welcome to part one in this two-part series on the top 10 causes of hiring pain. And I want to start out by saying that I get it. For many of you who are in a leadership position in a startup or a small business, hiring probably at times feels like a little more than a necessary evil. You know you need to do it, and you honestly wish you could just wave a magic wand and just have the people that you need to hire appear out of nowhere. But unfortunately, we haven't found that magic wand or, magic lamp with the hiring genie in the bottle, so to speak, to grant those wishes. And because of that, and honestly because nobody ever told us or taught us the secrets about hiring effectively in a streamlined and optimized way, I'd be willing to bet that your hiring experience has probably been a little painful at times. And for some people, and even for me at times, just thinking about hiring can be painful, almost physically painful. Like there were times when I would stress out about my hiring ineffectiveness and my stomach would just get all knotted up, because honestly, at times I didn't know what I was going to do. And maybe I've been trying to fill a particular role, but I hadn't made progress in weeks or occasionally months. And honestly, it was just easier to ignore it, forget about it, and pretend that the role didn't exist and that by not having the person that I needed to hire, that it, pretending that it wasn't keeping certain work from getting done and that it wasn't putting undue stress and pressure on me and on other employees. And really the sad thing is that, like most problems, ignoring it didn't mean that it was going away. And the reality is that the real cause of these hiring pains isn't from anything external to us. But, it's human nature. It's ingrained in our psychology whenever we experience problems like this to look outside of ourselves to external factors, when something isn't working the way that we would like it to or the way we think it should. And I want to explain why these hiring problems aren't caused by anything external and why those things outside of us, all those external factors, why they don't really matter. And the reason why those external things don't matter is because we can't control those things. We have no control over those things. We can't control that there are 500 jobs just like the jobs we're posting. There's 500 other jobs just like them posted on job boards. We can't control whether somebody decides they're interested in applying for our job or not. We can't control the things that happen to us. We can't control that bigger companies, these big competitors, that they want to hire the same types of people that we do. And we can't control if those bigger companies are trying to take our good employees from us. The only thing we can control are our own behaviors, our perspectives, and the actions we take. So in this episode and in this two-part series, I want to dive into the top 10 real causes of the hiring pains that we experience. And this list is a no excuses list of the top 10 causes of hiring pain. And I want to warn you before we dive in here and give you a bit of a disclaimer ahead of time that I'm not going to be pulling any punches here. If you've listened to my podcast or if you've seen other things I've put out there, I don't pull punches. I like to be real and upfront. Some of these are going to be really uncomfortable truths for you as they were for me. And some of them may be hard to hear, but in my experience, These truths are some of the truths that we've been avoiding. Maybe we haven't admitted to ourselves, and maybe we haven't heard before, but we really need to hear. So I hope that you'll listen intently to this, and I hope you will, dig deep and really think about whether any of these causes of hiring pain, whether they ring true with you. And in this first episode, this first part of this two-part series, we're going to start at number 10 and work our way down to cause number 6. And then in the next episode, we'll get to that top 5. So without further ado, cause of hiring pain number 10 is we experience hiring pain when we don't fully understand the impact of that next hire. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that because we don't think about what the impact of a particular hire is going to be, we give ourselves the leeway to ignore that hiring need. Like I said before, if we're having some struggles, having some problems, maybe we put our attention elsewhere because we haven't admitted to or fully understood the impact of making a hire. And I mean that in 2 ways. So there's the more obvious, quantifiable impact of hiring somebody for a certain role. If there are revenue numbers that they're going to hit, or there are projects that they're going to help get across the finish line, and the ways that they're going to help our customers, the ways we're going to save costs, all of those things that are quantifiable impact. But I also mean the human impact. There's that other side of this. It's not just about the revenue increases or the cost savings or the efficiency gains. There's also the human impact. By hiring some people in a particular role, understanding how our customers are going to be better served, understanding how this person's colleagues, their direct manager, maybe the people that are going to be managed by this new hire, like what the impact is going to be of getting the right person hired in this role and doing so in an efficient and timely manner. How are those people's lives going to be improved? And I find that when we avoid understanding that impact, it really paints hiring in a real negative light, because all we're worried about is just checking the box on getting that hiring need, off our plate, as opposed to really understanding what the impact is going to be to the business and to people once we find the right person for the role. And when we do understand the impact of making a hire, it starts to be a little bit less about our struggles and a little bit more about really finding the right person for the job. And it can really change our perspective there. So we are causing ourselves a lot of pain by not getting clarity on the impact of your next hire. Moving on down the list to number 9, we experience hiring pain when we lack empathy towards job seekers. When we treat everyone who's applying for a job like just another number, they're just another resume on a pile of resumes. And when we don't treat them like human beings, when we don't give them a clear outline and a clear view of what our recruiting process looks like, when we keep them in the dark, like every step is supposed to be some big surprise and you don't find out what the next step is going to be until you get through this step. And I don't know why we do that. Maybe we feel like we've got some trade secrets that we need to keep hidden. But when you don't provide people who apply for your role with clarity on what they can expect when they apply, what they can expect if they get through a screening process or they get into interviews, or when you're in an interview process and you get through the first round and not telling them what they can expect the next step to be. We do that for inexplicable reasons. But when we do that, we just create a lot of uncertainty in candidates that doesn't really need to be there. And it really communicates a lack of empathy. And when we do things like this, when we treat people like another number, when we don't give them a transparent view of the structure and nature of the recruiting process, it starts to lead to an awful candidate experience. And really nobody wants to work for a place that seems disorganized and opaque, unprofessional, or that would treat people this way. And let's be clear, for most people, your recruiting process is their first exposure to your organization and how you treat people. And as the saying goes, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So what kind of impression do we want to make? Do we want one that is an awful experience, or do we want to provide a great experience that shows people that we actually value people? And the best way to develop and display empathy to job seekers is really by understanding where they're coming from. So if you pause for a minute and think not about everything that you and your team has to do in your recruiting process, if you start to think about the job search from the perspective of the job seeker, you start to understand how important a job search is to anybody who is a passive or active job seeker. I mean, when you realize that this is their career, and maybe as a staff recruiter or a hiring manager or an agency recruiter, maybe this is one of many roles over time that you are trying to fill, whether you're trying to fill it for your employer or you're trying to help a client company fill it as an agency recruiter. You might have multiple roles you're trying to fill, but for the job seeker, this is their career, their one and only career. And unless this is some like part-time or a temporary role, like this is their one and only job. And many of them already have a full-time job. I mean, we've got very low unemployment, so a lot of job seekers are already gainfully employed, and which means that they have a full-time gig, 40 hours a week. And on top of that, they're taking on the added pressure and added responsibility of potentially finding a new job. And it's said a lot, and it's so true, that finding a job is like a part-time job in and of itself. So now these people who are potentially going to come and work for you are going out of their way to take on an additional part-time job on top of their existing responsibilities. And when you realize that this is their one and only job, and they're going to be spending like half of their waking hours either at the job, commuting to or from the job, half your waking hours, that's a big decision. It's a major life decision. So I'm not saying this to make you want to behave all altruistically, but just understanding where a job seeker is coming from can help us to introduce a little bit of empathy into our process. But again, it's not just to be altruistic and, kissing people's butts. You have to understand that people talk, and they talk to people they know, and they talk to people who ask about their experience in your recruiting process. And if you lack empathy towards job seekers and they have a negative experience, they're going to talk, whether that's to people they know directly, whether that's posting something on social media, maybe even going as far as to write a review of your recruiting process on a site like Glassdoor. And when people like to talk about their experiences, they typically like to share two types of experiences. They usually like to talk about great experiences and terrible experiences. Think for a second the last time you looked at a review of a product on Amazon. And if you look at some random product on Amazon, and let's just say the average customer review was a 3.8. Well, if you look at the breakdown of the reviews of that product, what do you usually find? What you usually find is you look at the 5-star reviews, and there's a bunch. Then you look at 4-star reviews, and the count's not that high. 3-star reviews, very few of those. 2-star, very few of those. 1-star, a lot more. Not as many as the 5-star reviews, but still a lot more than any of the 2, 3s, or 4s. And that's the way things work with online reviews in general. People want to share their opinion when something's either a great experience or when it's a terrible experience. And when you think about how important a decision it is to leave the safety and comfort of a job and go check out a new opportunity, if you start seeing a bunch of negative experiences, that's going to dissuade you. So by not being empathetic, towards job seekers. We really are risking our reputation, and we're risking not just losing that candidate who might be a potentially great candidate, but also damaging our reputation in the future. So that's a lot of potential damage we can do by not being empathetic and not treating people like human beings. Moving on down to number 8, we cause ourselves a ton of hiring pain when we approach things passively. And what do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that we don't evolve our approach. We feel like we can do very simple things like posting a job ad on a job board or two, and then kicking back and just expecting the applications from wildly qualified candidates to just start rolling in. And I can tell you from experience, that is rarely what happens. And the reason I believe that we tend to take this passive approach is because we fail to treat a job market like it's every other market. We feel like maybe the job market doesn't follow the rules of other markets. Maybe the job market is just static in nature and it's never really changing. And if you behave that way, well, I have some unfortunately bad news. You're probably going to be very disappointed. And you've probably been very disappointed in recent years when we're in a very competitive job market. And one of the phrases you might have heard being thrown around to describe our current job market is candidate driven. And what that means is that candidates have a lot more options these days than they used to even 5-10 years ago. And so the candidates that are available and the candidates that are interested, they are really driving behavior in the market. Think of it like this. Think of it as if you owned a burger joint. Right? You own a restaurant that specializes in selling burgers. And think of your customers as potential candidates. Well, if you own a burger joint and you're the only burger restaurant in town, then you don't have to put in a lot of effort to get people interested to come and try your burgers. But as soon as McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's move into town, well, now you can't just expect people to want to come to you by default to have a burger. And then some other independent, fancy, gourmet burger place opens up around the corner. And you expect people to just keep coming to you for burgers because that's the way it had been before when you were the only game in town. Does this make sense? If you understand what I'm saying here, it's that when people have more options than ever, we can't expect the old behaviors that worked whenever people didn't have a ton of options. We can't expect those same behaviors to work. So if you approach hiring as a passive activity in a market where you have to compete to get the attention of and the interest of qualified candidates, then you're going to cause yourself a lot of pain. So you have to be more proactive and choose some tactics that are going to work to get people's attention when there is a competitive market. Next, at number 7, we cause ourselves a ton of hiring pain. And I can speak from personal experience on this one. We cause ourselves a ton of hiring pain when we treat hiring as a temporary problem. Or put more appropriately, when we apply temporary solutions to what is ultimately a permanent issue. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, if I can just make these last 2 hires, or I've only got one more hire to make, and then I'll be done. It's really a beautiful, optimistic, idealistic, and unfortunately short-sighted and foolish mindset to have, and kind of a foolish thing to say to ourselves. But like I said, I've been there and I've done exactly that. And I can call this out because I've had that thought, man, if I could just close this one last role, just make this one last hire, then I'll get some of my free time back. I'll be able to focus on some of my other responsibilities that I've been neglecting if I can just make this last hire. And it's completely logical why we do this. Because what we see in front of us are the positions that we have to fill. And that's it. And when I was a hiring manager starting out, before I started really solving my hiring problems, I didn't pay any attention to the trends and the behaviors in the job market. And it was only once I really started to study these dynamics of the job market that I started to understand the truth. And here's just a little bit of truth that can seem a little bleak, but it's good to know and face the reality. And here's that truth. And the truth is that in the United States, and this is 2019 as I'm recording this, in the United States, the average voluntary turnover, and that's people, employees, quitting their jobs to go to a new company, the average voluntary turnover is projected to be 33% in the United States this year in 2019, and is projected to be 33% again next year in 2020. And that's 33%, so 1/3 of employees are expected to quit their jobs and go to another company. And keep in mind, that's just voluntary turnover. That doesn't count the people that you have to lay off. It doesn't count the people you have to fire. It doesn't count somebody who you might promote internally to a higher level position, leaving then maybe an opening where you have to backfill their old position. It doesn't include employees who might go from one business unit and move internally to another, or from one department to another. So just the number of people who on average are going to quit to go to another company is around 1/3 of employees. So to put that in real numbers, let's just say, to use nice round numbers, you have 12 employees. That means that if you have average turnover this year, you could expect 4 of those employees to quit for another job. And then let's just say you backfill them, but you keep your headcount the same. You can expect 4 people to quit and go to another job at another company next year. So on average, you could expect to lose 1 person a month. So as you're going then to close out these last remaining roles, you have to know that turnover is inevitably coming, even if you have above average retention rates. So we cause ourselves a lot of pain by not being prepared. Like I said, this has happened to me, and I wish that I hadn't been so foolish and so short-sighted. But in my first role as a hiring manager, I was in that executive position for around 4 years. I was at that company in that role. And I remember thinking, after having about 6 or 7 open roles that we had really been cranking on and got so close, and I had 1 opening left to fill, and then that offer got accepted. And I was thinking, oh man, this is amazing. I'm finally down to inbox 0 on my number of open roles, and I can now go back and focus on some other things, and I don't have to spend all this time focused on recruiting and on hiring and on reviewing resumes and on interviews and phone screens and all these things. And do you know what happened? Not 2 days later, I had an employee submit his 2 weeks notice. So I had 2 days of glorious, optimistic, foolish victory where I didn't have an open position. And then all of a sudden, now unexpectedly, I had another role that I had to fill. And I wish that I had seen this at the time, but it took a little while, but eventually I became a little more prepared. But over that 4-year span, I had a total of about 3 weeks. And that's not 3 weeks consecutive. That's like literally the days that, if you added them all up, where I didn't have an open position that I had to fill, was about 3 weeks over 4 years. And I wish I had known that going into the role, that I should always at least be prepared to have to hire someone. And it didn't mean that I had to know exactly what I was going to be hiring for or anything like that, but just the knowledge that this was going to be a permanent part of my responsibilities would have been hugely beneficial, and I would have prepared in a different way. So by treating hiring as a temporary problem, and by trying to apply temporary solutions to what is really a permanent problem, we cause ourselves a ton of hiring pain. And the last cause of hiring pain that we're going to touch on in this episode is number 6. And we cause ourselves a lot of hiring pain when we think that everything is going fine, and fine is good enough. So good to great companies when it comes to hiring, particularly the startups and small businesses, who do understand that when you've got a small team and grand ambitions, and that every role is critical and every role has a sense of urgency tied to it. When you have 12 employees, so the next one person is critical bandwidth and expertise that you really need to hire, and you need to find the right person and do it soon. Those good to great companies typically have a time to hire of about 3 weeks on average. And by that I mean from the time they open a position and they promote it, job ad, reaching out to recruiters, whatever, by the time they open a position, between that time and when they have an offer accepted is around 3 weeks on average. And again, that's the average. So that means that sometimes they can fill a role in 1 or 2 weeks, and sometimes it might take them 5 to 6, but on average, 3 weeks. The national average in the United States, at least, is about 7 weeks it takes somebody to close a role, that 7-week time to hire on average. So that means if it takes you longer than that, if it takes you a lot longer than that, then people might begin to assume that you don't really think that hiring is very important. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but if it's taking you longer than that average, then clearly it's a below average importance. And if you don't think it's important enough to dedicate the proper expertise and the proper bandwidth to finding and hiring the right people, that's okay. But then don't pretend that it's important. Don't pretend like if you have below average performance in this area, if it takes you a lot longer than 6 or 7 weeks to fill a role, don't pretend like everything is fine and that fine is good enough. I mean, we cause ourselves not just hiring pain, but a ton of pain whenever we pretend that nothing's wrong and that everything is just fine and it's just okay and that's good enough for us. I mean, what message are you sending to your employees who are carrying the workload that should be partially carried by the people that you haven't hired yet? And you're supposed to be hiring people to help carry that workload. What message are you sending to them whenever you pretend that everything's fine when clearly it is not? I like to picture recruiting and hiring as an internal version of sales and marketing, where that product delivery, that value delivery is finding the right person and getting them to accept an offer. That's your conversion, right? So if you think about it in that way, what would people say if your CMO or your VP of sales was walking around saying that everything is fine? We're reaching a okay number of potential customers and our shopper to buyer ratio is okay. Nobody would stand for that. So by saying things are fine whenever they're not, by even believing that things are fine and that fine is an acceptable standard, you're going to cause a ton of pain in hiring and with the rest of your staff who is not getting the support that they need. Okay, so we've reached the end of part 1 of hiring pain. And I know that may have seemed a little bit bleak and dark, but I promise you that I am not going through these causes of hiring pain to point fingers at anybody. It's really more so that we could start to identify what could be causing some of our problems. Because there's nothing worse than trying to solve a problem and not knowing the root cause. Heck, maybe the only thing worse than that is not admitting that we have a problem or pointing the finger at something external and thinking that nothing we can do to solve the problem. So yes, the bad news is that we have some hiring pains. Because hiring is evolving and because nobody ever taught us or trained us how to do it effectively, it leads to some pain. I mean, as a good friend of mine says, there's no college degree you can get that has the word recruiting in the title. So we're going to have some of these pains. That's the bad news. The good news is that admitting that we're experiencing some hiring pain and looking at and being able to identify and admit to what might be causing that pain is an amazing first step in actually addressing the pain and solving the problem. So that's the good news. The better news is that I promise you that there is not only a solution to relieving these pains, the Advil, the aspirin of solving hiring pains, there's not just one solution. There are so many solutions to each and every one of these pain points. And you just have to be able to pick which are the biggest pain points for you and which solutions you're going to use to address those pains. And by admitting that, you have some of these hiring pains and that you need to address them because hiring is important and finding the right people is important. And by admitting that, you are already entering rarefied air and getting such a leg up on so many companies who don't understand the value of people, of having the right people, and getting those right people on board in a timely fashion. And the best news of all is that solving these problems isn't as hard as you think it would be. One of the reasons that we don't take action a lot of times is because we think that things are so complex, so complicated, that there's nothing we can do to address the root issues. And the one thing that I discovered is that, hiring is not rocket surgery. It is not that complicated. It can really be simple. And whether you are a hiring manager, an executive, a staff recruiter, an HR professional, or whether you are working with a headhunter, an agency recruiter with client companies trying to help them find the best employees they can, I promise you that hiring can be simple. And I know you'll see that when you take a look at the free crash course that I just made available to you. So when I was first in a hiring manager role as an executive, I struggled with overcomplicating hiring as much as the next person. But when I turned the corner was when I was able to take my software engineering background. So as a software engineer, I developed the ability to look at a system, whether that was a software system or it was a human system, and to take a system that looked complex and complicated and deconstruct it into its respective components. And by then looking at those components and how they work together, I was able to streamline and optimize that system. And that's exactly what I did with hiring. And now I'm offering that same insight, that same knowledge and expertise to you in the form of this crash course, which I've called Hire, Faster, Stronger. And that's Hire, H-I-R-E, because I like wordplay. And so what you can do to get access to this crash course completely for free is to go to this link. And I'll include the link in the show notes as well. So it's a shortened link. If you ever used bit.ly, bit.ly, you would go to bit.ly/hire faster stronger. All one word. Again, hire, H-I-R-E. And when you follow that link, you're going to get access and have the opportunity for two things. That'll take you to a page where you can click to get access to the Hire Faster Stronger crash course in high performance hiring. And you will get access to that crash course inside of a new community that we've developed. And we specifically designed this community for driven leaders, like-minded professionals just like you. And it's a community really for everyone to learn, share in their problems, their struggles, their wins, their successes, and to support each other in addressing these issues and these pain points in hiring and retaining great people. So again, go to bit.ly/hire faster stronger to secure your seat in this 38-minute hiring crash course today. It will take no time to go through and learn all about the 5 components of high performance hiring. And you'll get access to an awesome community of driven, like-minded leaders as well. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this episode. I hope you enjoyed this part 1. Next week's episode, where we're going to wrap things up, we're going to count down from 5 all the way down to the number 1 major cause of hiring pain. If you enjoyed this episode and you're not subscribed to the podcast, you should definitely subscribe now so you can check out our back catalog of archived episodes, as well as make sure you get every single new episode the day that it is published. And of course, if you learned something or if you were entertained or you enjoyed yourself, I would love for you to leave us a review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. Podcatcher's a weird name, but that's what they seem to be calling them these days. leave us a 5-star review, let us know how we're doing, and maybe you'll be featured on a future episode. And so until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.